Without further ado, Sean.
Welcome, Sean.
Hey guys.
Hey there.
Hey, how are you?
All right, whenever you're ready.
Good.
Good.
Yeah, you heard us talking. We're so excited.
Well, good. I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible, and I'm going to try to cram 10 years of experience into 6 actionable steps so that you can deliver successful wayfinding. So we'll see how it goes. So in this model of the 6 steps, they're all on screen right now, and I'm not going to read through each of these, but each of these 6 steps are important to accomplish a successful wayfinding deployment. Because, wayfinding has evolved dramatically over just from the static map or the static directory to completely interactive experiences that you can either take with you. In fact, in some cases, you don't even have to touch the screen if you don't want to. You can simply talk to it. You can point to QR tags. You can point to bit.lys, and you can actually take the entire project with you if that need be the case. So I'm going to attempt to go through these 6 steps in 30 minutes, plus walk you through some of these designs and how these designs move beyond just the wayfinding project into classic digital signage, customized interactive experiences, and even room signs that are mounted outside of conference room or classroom doors, so that the entire event schedule or the fact that you can book the event from a large display can be carried down all the way down to the individual room. So we'll go through these 6 steps there in some logical order here. So step 1, of course, is there a problem to solve? And the fact is, I bring this up because oftentimes people say that they need digital signage or wayfinding just to look good or keep up with the Joneses. And that certainly may be the case. But wayfinding, by its very nature, is getting people from point A to point B. We use this simple example at MIT. And so, for example, if we're looking for an event here and we want to find it, and we'll say it's this one on the 5th floor, we get our little interactive map that shows paths to the elevator and then getting off the elevator on the 5th floor. Now, that seems very straightforward. That is a classic wayfinding application. How do I get from point A to point B? But what's more important is when people show up to this wayfinding display, what is it that they're actually looking for? Are they looking for a room number? Are they looking for an event? Are they looking for an individual? So oftentimes when people show up to one of these signs, they're not actually sure, or they don't remember where it is that they're supposed to go. They might remember that there's an event directory, or they may even remember that there's an individual person that they're looking for. So they're looking for a faculty or staff member. So we have 2 different scenarios here, but one thing that is very common is events are very popular. Event management and event trafficking and movement to events is popular not only in wayfinding, but in classic digital signage, and I mentioned earlier room signs. So you have people, places, and events that you want to make sure you map into your wayfinding platform. Of course, space utilization is also an issue. And you can imagine in this sort of pandemic, post-pandemic era, space utilization might be even more important. So in this particular design with this account, you can see that there are rooms available and unavailable. So in this particular case, this one's available. There are no events for this room. However, if we had enabled other features for this particular design, the individual might be able to book the room from this display. So with a finite number of conference rooms and classrooms available, it might be extremely important in this 21-story building to book a particular room because they might be in great demand. So these types of technologies extend themselves not only from that large form factor wayfinding display, but also down to room signs. So you can see here, these are examples of room signs that might have bidirectional booking features. So I can book this room now if I need to. So you might not only have bidirectional features, you might also have static features like electronic paper signs, which have the event schedule present that's tied back to that large form factor display, and the data gets transferred down to these signs so that people know that that room is actually booked. So usefulness. Now, you guys mentioned this earlier. You would have loved to have had wayfinding when you were in college. Well, wayfinding is certainly very important. And you mentioned hospitals and commercial lobbies, because more than likely in a commercial lobby or a hospital, that wayfinding kiosk can be used 24/7, 365. However, when you look at like a university, in this particular case, University of Washington, wayfinding might only be relevant for the first 2 weeks of the semester, because after those first 2 weeks are over, students know where they're going more than likely. So you might integrate something beyond just wayfinding into this design. So in this particular case, you might want to explore sustainability on this particular campus. So we could default back to wayfinding if we wanted to, but if we wanted to learn more about what the commuting goals are at this particular university, or other live data sources can be fed in to get more usefulness out of this sign beyond the period where wayfinding might be applicable. So I mentioned the Joneses, right? A lot of people want to keep up with the Joneses. And that's an important factor, but it's really probably not a good selling point. The more you understand about what they're trying to accomplish, the better off you are from the beginning, whether that be a client or an integrator. Either way, it's important to understand what the real objectives are so that you can build a design around those objectives. Because this isn't just about technology. We're going to show technology, but it's also about the design and integration with other data sources. And so that all comes into play because usefulness certainly is important in this design here, where it's a complicated 21-story building. And it's also important in this design over here, because when we look at this one, you can see here that this is an unusually designed building. And you can see that there are about 10 floors here with lots of spaces in this particular building itself. So return on investment is an important factor, because if you're simply trying to reduce questions to that volunteer at the administrative or information desk, this is certainly an easy way to do it. But if you're trying to answer other questions, then you need to incorporate that into your design as you're building out this project. So step 2, we've got to identify the logical champion. So we've already decided that, yes, they do have a problem. They're trying to solve several different things. But in identifying the logical champion, there are really 2 champions. And there's the one who says, we have to have it. And then later, there's someone who says, I own it, right? Identifying the I own it person is far more difficult than I have to have it, right? And it's easy to satisfy I have to have it. Facilities managers, space planners, college deans, sometimes directors of IT, the CIO. And in many cases, it might be a general contractor who specified this because facility or space planning people wanted it. This is actually the easy part. These are the guys that are going to place the order. They have to compare the prices, the features. They want to know that it's going to do everything that they could possibly want it to do. But yet, at this stage, there's not a champion, right? And the champion is who our deployment team often runs into after it's fully deployed. And so all of a sudden, these people come out of the woodwork who have been assigned responsibility for maintaining this wayfinding project. Now, wayfinding actually is a little different, because most of what's being fed to a wayfinding design is something that's coming from a data source, right? And that data source is being driven by IT or somebody else. And that particular data source is something that's maintained over time. It's only when you have to make changes to this design, or if you're going to incorporate other content or other materials, or you want to change the slideshow in the background, right? That's when you begin to learn that there are people that, and I quote, own it. And they are often hard to find in the very beginning. So it is important to identify the champion. And I believe it's more important, we believe it's more important to identify those people that are going to own it in the long term, because the person that buys it often drops it after they purchased it. Right, so next stage. So now we've identified who wants it, we've identified what their problem is and what they're trying to solve. So now we have to plan for the technology strategy that we're going to employ. So when we look at the technology that you see behind me, on the surface, it's very straightforward stuff. AV integrators, IT VARs, architects, consultants, you guys have been deploying this stuff for more than a decade, right? In more than a decade for this purpose. But there are other things that you have to consider. In our case scenario here, we have 5 displays. We have 2 different orientations, and we have several resolutions. So you have to confirm in the beginning how many displays you're going to use, because it might be easy at this particular school here, Arkansas Tech. This might be one that you could just deploy in the lobby of one building so that people can know about what's going on in this particular hall. It's a pretty straightforward design, right? However, when you get over to this design over here, this 21-story building, right, it might benefit this client to have this same design on all 21 floors. Because when I leave the first floor, as I arrive into the building and I get off on, let's say, the 16th floor, I might not remember where I'm supposed to go when I exit the elevator here and decide which way I'm supposed to go. Am I going north, south, you name it, right? So it would behoove them to deploy the same design on all 21 floors, which again is very different than Arkansas Tech over here. Resolution is important because oftentimes people will employ one large display in the lobby in a series of smaller displays throughout the facility. And it's important to ensure that the resolution on those smaller displays matches. Orientation. Orientation is ADA. This is an important thing here because you can imagine this is a tall building. And the way it works is it fits on this screen very well. Events directories fit on screens like this in this orientation very well. But of course, large flat buildings like this one over here at MIT, right? This works much better on a landscape design. The importance of bringing up ADA. You can note here that all of these functions at the top of the screen are certainly not ADA compliant. And I put them up here for the purpose of this presentation because we can't interact with them. You can't really see it, but grayed out here at the bottom is a wheelchair icon. And so if we create a design with ADA not in mind in the beginning, we can always go back and add it by adding a button at the bottom to pull those features down lower on the screen so that anybody can interact with them, right? So you pick up the ADA piece there. Infrastructure and IO. This is an important one. I'm going to go back to this slide right here because what you're seeing on screen, this is a design at a church. And this particular design, I bring it up because there's some interactive elements here that you would not normally think about. There are 10 displays in this design. There is one media player that is feeding all 10 screens with a video that spans the entire distance of the 10 screens. But you'll notice that each one of these screens, if you can see it in the PowerPoint presentation, each one of them has a circle with a different tap point. And inside of these tap points are videos or material that's dedicated to that display. So if the person taps that display, it switches the input on that display to a different media player that is isolated to just that screen, while the other 9 screens continue to play the video, or 8 or 7 or 6, depending on how many people are interacting with this video wall. So that's just an IO piece that makes an important, point in terms of, its design. People often ask about Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is one of those things that makes it easy for you to not have any cords. And for example, our videographer here is walking around without any cords, and Wi-Fi makes it easy from a connection perspective. But Wi-Fi is also not nearly as reliable as other wired networks. So it's something to consider, which goes back to power over Ethernet. If there's another way to do it, PoE is an approach that can be used not only for these large-scale media players, but the room signs that we looked at earlier. That's another approach. And in fact, some of those can even be battery operated. The last thing I want to bring up is HTML5. You can either have these designs made in some sort of format that is proprietary, and there are a lot of proprietary technologies out there. The problem is, if you do it and have it built in some sort of proprietary technology, then how are you going to edit it later, right? It becomes more difficult to do so, particularly if you've lost the personnel that were involved in the original design. So we often encourage HTML5 or common formats that anybody can edit so that when the design is turned over to you, you can edit it after the fact or pay any other party versus the original party to edit those designs. Data sources. You've seen a couple of data sources here. We have a people directory. It could be something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet that's updated. We have event data sources like over here, which can be easily maintained with other event directories. So it could be Google Calendar, Microsoft Office Exchange. There might be other data sources, like in this particular case here, a donor wall that's incorporated into this wayfinding design, which could be comprised of simple data entry or much more complex entries so that we can drill down onto Jack and Charlene Ham, for example, and learn about their background and why they gave so much money to Arkansas Tech. And you noticed earlier on this design here, the sustainability design, some of the other data sources may include sources that are pulling from other nonprofit data sources, things that are measuring contributions, for example, to this particular fund. So data sources are important. and access to those data sources. So usernames, authentication, that kind of stuff is an important piece to understand from the beginning. Speakers and microphones. Speakers are easy. There's all sorts of dome speakers. We don't talk about audio unless you're going to do some sort of domed, cover. But when it comes to speakers, this is a great example at MIT and microphones, for example. Instead of touching this display, I can just say, Andrew, show me level 5. And you can see that, this particular is, Andrew, show me level 5. I'm talking a lot here today, so I'm sorry about that. But so you can see the change in screens. So Andrew, show me level 2. And you switches to level 2. Andrew, where is Bank of America? And you can see Andrew maps our path to Bank of America. So in this particular case, I'm not even interacting with the screen, but microphones are incredibly important because even in our closed environment here, I'm talking a lot. There could be lots of people talking. So audio engineers that understand microphone and microphone design are extremely important when you talk about using a hands-free approach and you're going to use microphones. So a couple other ones here. We have mobile. So in this particular case with ConocoPhillips, we could have added a QR tag, but instead they provided a bit.ly on their intranet so that the individual could actually take the design with them. So instead of looking at, look at this building here, so I can actually take this entire project with me on my mobile device versus having to remember where I need to get off or where I need to go once I get on the 15th floor. So we can do it this way. You could actually text directions. So I enter my phone number on there and it sends me turn-by-turn directions. I can print it, or I could even try touch-free. So for example, we'll try this touch-free approach where I just use my camera. We've applied a QR tag to this particular screen. It opens a browser. So now I have this free touch product and anywhere I want to go. So I back up here from this display. You can see the little blue dot on the display and we can move it around. So while I'm on my phone, I can point to the room directory, tap it, and I bring up the room directory. And so later, if I want to go to, let's say this area on the 5th floor, I tap that and it shows me how to get to this space on the 5th floor. So I can show that sort of interactivity. So step 4, we're going to continue on and we're going to start concepting and building this solution. So as we start concepting what it is that we want to do, we of course have to look at all the design elements. So we have to collect all the assets that we possibly can, all the brand guidelines, everything that's going to make this design look like ConocoPhillips versus MIT versus University of Washington. And most organizations have incredibly strict brand designs because they want it to look like their brand. The next thing you have to do is count the numbers. And this is the point where everyone makes a mistake. So people can talk about wayfinding and using interior beacons and all these sort of automated mapping tools. In our experience, that's not the most successful way to do it. So when you look at this 21-story building, you have to collect all the paths that you're looking for. So if you're showing path maps to all of these spaces, you have to count each and every one of these spaces because a human programmer and a designer is going to map the route to each and every one of those spaces, which is a time-consuming process. So it's important to understand the total number of endpoints and the numbers of destinations, directories, rooms, events, all of those types of things. It's important to understand that. Data sources. You have to be able to access these data sources, test these data sources, and ensure connectivity over the long haul. If not, parts of your wayfinding project will appear to be broken. You also understand, is it a 2D design here? Is it a 3D design? Is it a flat design? What are they looking for? And often that's driven by brand strategy within that organization. And of course, you want to have a good first impression. We know, for example, if we walk into a lobby, we know up front that this is a wayfinding design. We walk into this facility, either one of these, and we don't really know that these are wayfinding kiosks. It does say touchscreen to begin. And the reason I bring this up is because the entire architectural surround around this design could indicate to the passerby, if you want to know where you need to go, touch here, right? And incorporate that into the design versus just this freestanding kiosk for the purpose of demonstration. And of course, what I really want to stress is all of these designs, when you go to design them, it is test and repeat, test and repeat. It is over and over and over again because this is a one-off human experience that is interactive, very similar to what you see with Crestron programming and Crestron design. what appears to be simple to understand to an engineer might not be simple to understand for the typical user. So that's an important piece of the puzzle, and particularly when it's multiple floors. You can see this would be a large design. All right, 2 more to go. Step number 5, delivering long-term support. This is important because once we create this design and it's built here and it's installed in our client's facility, the expectation then is it's going to run forever. And there are ways to make money and there are ways to save money. And perpetual licenses have been around for a really long time, and these designs often appear to be perpetual. However, today you can imagine most of them are subscriptions. And with those subscriptions, we find AV integrators providing remote monitoring services via other tools. So they're not only monitoring the playback of the media player that is actually driving the display, but they're monitoring the display itself so that they understand if there are errors that appear in any sort of these map designs and whether or not everything is fully operational and running. Another piece to consider is content management. So you don't really think about content management with this sort of design, but when you start incorporating things like donor boards, and if you're including information about the people inside the donor board list, in this case, we can't do this, but if we wanted to drill down in on the First State Bank, we might learn more about what's going on at the First State Bank, who its current president is. Well, next year it might have a different president. And certainly the same can be said for this type of design here, where we've incorporated other media because we've decided that this is only good for the first 2 weeks of each semester, which is twice a year, maybe summer school. So there's a lot of content that can be updated here under the content services model, which is an ongoing subscription model. Code revisions and updates, that's another one. You guys know this from the Crestron control stuff. When you build a design for a conference room or some other market segment, and that code has to be edited because new devices were added at a later date, somebody has to go back and rewrite or change the code. And that's the same that applies here. If you're going to learn code, for example, in a Google Voice application, and you're going to add new commands to it or new languages or new language packs, somebody's going to have to go back and redesign or revise that code set. And then, of course, the last piece is, and this is pretty common in the wayfinding market space, is product lifecycle management. Well, so the display is good for a pretty good period of time. But when you look at the appliance, whether it's an appliance media player or a Windows media player or some other standard OS like that, over time, the hardware ages. And you do need to look at, updating the hardware over time so that you can keep that technology current. We have many clients who find themselves boxed in to old hardware because there's not a plan for hardware lifecycle management. And certainly, it's a new trend, and of course, in the market space, hardware as a service, keeping people up to grade with new hardware, and that's just another way to keep them up to date and keep you in front of a client that you've already known for a long time. So the last step, extending beyond the map, right? We talked a little bit about this earlier, but architectural integration is an important piece. When you look at buildings that are well done and designs that are well done, the entire surround around the display matches the environment. There are commands, there are instructions about using this technology, right? It's not just the display mounted on the wall. Some people like that clean design, but I've seen many other projects that look a lot better when the architects are involved in the process. Building a customized experience is important because if I build this design here, I might want to take it with me on my phone. I might want to use a QR tag and interact with that display without touching it. I might want to print it out on a piece of paper. So, creating this custom experience where what I find important at this display, you might not. So I might find commuting goals important because let's say I bike to school every day, but somebody else is more concerned about sustainability, from the dining services and what kind of waste they're producing, and or are they using organic, locally processed food, et cetera. So I'm building a custom experience that I can either talk to, that I can take with me, or I can interact with on this display. I mentioned it earlier, facilities utilization management. The number one thing that people put on these wayfinding projects, besides getting from A to B, is event-related information. And there are a lot of people that do this, that produce this type of technology. But the number one thing that you will find in digital signage that ends up on screen is event-based information. And what better way to take that event information from the big sign all the way down to the conference room or the classroom and put it in a format where people can either interact with it remotely and it populates the screen, or you can walk up to the screen and interact with it and it remotely populates the other screens, right? This is a powerful piece of moving beyond just the screen itself. I mentioned, this is a gateway for exploration. This is just another way to learn more about the environment that you're in. And the last thing I want to talk about, all of these screens, they cost money and they can serve more than just one purpose beyond just the wayfinding experience. We can add alert notification to these displays so that in the event of an emergency, the paths can show individuals to where the stairwells are versus the elevators. The paths can show where the exits are. And also the sign can be completely changed to provide all of the visitors or people in that building with instructions on what to do in the event of this emergency. So again, we're going beyond being just a map and utilizing that technology for everything that it can be used for. So that's our 6 steps to successful wayfinding deployment. And I want to turn it back over to you guys for any questions that you may have at this point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean, for all of that insight. I mean, just from my perspective to hear and see the 6 steps, and I'm a note taker, and so for me, bullet points and being able to see something very definitively laid out, that was amazing. And I actually have a couple of questions here, just talking about what you just shared. First of all, this was a really cool presentation. It was extremely interactive. Literally, it was like we're walking around. We're kind of finding our way around your presentation. How did you guys shoot this? Like, how are you guys doing that currently? Is it with a camera? How are you guys doing that?
Yeah, so actually this was quite the technical hurdle. So what we have, in fact, we'll spin around here so you can see. So you can go ahead and spin at least. So we have a videographer using a Surface tablet. We were using one display as our sort of teleprompter. And then, of course, we have what's going on in the back so that we can see the event as it occurs. So she's walking around with a Surface tablet. Her arms will probably be sore tomorrow, but she does go to CrossFit, so she might be good.
I'm good.
Hey. That's what it's for, truly. That's the only reason why I go to the gym, is to carry my devices, all of them. That's awesome. Thank you for showing us that. And that was from our end, just a presenter's question, because I think sometimes we look at how can we be more engaging with some of our clients? How can we showcase what we're doing in a fun way where, it's not the typical thing. And I thought that was really cool. So thank you for showing us that. So something a little bit more on the digital signage, and as somebody who's obviously an expert in the field when it comes to wayfinding, what is maybe one common issue that you have seen within digital signage that can really improve wayfinding? And maybe give us, you could do case studies, whatever you kind of have seen on the field, and maybe your opinion on how they can improve those systems.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces is creating a more customized experience, right? And, I think when you look at designs like this ConocoPhillips design here, for example, there's, you have to remember that, of course, we're trying to meet what the client's expectations are and what they're trying to accomplish. But, that we could do so much more with this design by, enabling the ability to book rooms directly from this display, the ability to take this with you so that as you make your way through the building, you get off the elevator and you know which way to go, whether it be turn by turn text directions or whether it be a replication of this design on your phone. There's something to understand too, though, about taking the design with you. So if you take a client like this who's in the oil and gas industry, they didn't really want people taking the building design with them because some people could use that design information for nefarious purposes, right? So I think it's important to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish with this display and this project, and ensure that you're meeting all of those expectations by incorporating it in the design up front, because it's easier to pull those things out than it is to add them back later. So I think that's a key piece is, getting the most out of it that you can, versus if you think about when you walk into let's say your accountant's office or whatever, and it's a 4-story building, you never remember what the suite number is. You remember your accountant's name. You find that they're on room 403, and you just go up to the 4th floor and you get off at, the elevator and go to room 403. But that's a pretty simple design. It's when you get into these more complicated designs where I think that it's more important to really ferret out what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, truly understanding what, like you said on the beginning, in the front end, identifying what the problem is and what you want the consumer to come away from and come away with. And that was really interesting that you touched on maybe not giving them too much, right? Like being able to understand exactly what you want people to walk away with so that you can preserve the integrity of your project, but also make sure you're adding value. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for that. There was one question, so I think we may have time for one more question. It was specifically on Wi-Fi versus wireless. Maybe just a quick suggestion of when to or when not to, or one specific use case that you found that maybe shouldn't have been Wi-Fi versus making sure that it's connected.
Yep. So use cases where Wi-Fi notoriously is problematic is in those designs where this particular design is hosted in the cloud, right? And the entire project is HTML5. And anytime that Wi-Fi goes down, if it's not cached properly, then of course we basically lose this display. That's one scenario. Another scenario is where we want to interact with the display for the purpose of turn-by-turn directions. We're going to enter our phone number and we want the display basically to send us turn-by-turn directions. That's another where Wi-Fi has its limitation problems, because any functionality that can be removed, and let's say it's a live event database, and so if we have any sort of disconnect, and I'm not saying that a wired installation might not have IT or network failures, but the probability that the Wi-Fi goes down statistically is higher in some of these cases than what we've seen in wired environments. Again, I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but functionality can be lost with that Wi-Fi disconnect.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sean and the physics team, for that interactive session. And I'm going to go ahead and move it along. I really appreciate everything that you just shared.
Great. Thank you.